Wait, where? What? I'm in a box!
Oh no, not the box.
This is the Escape the Zoo podcast. With your host, Daniel Clark.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Escape the Zoo podcast, where we talk everything wildlife. Today's guest is a very, very exciting guest. Cristina Mittermeier is a contributing photographer, speaker, and explorer for National Geographic. She's the founder and president of SeaLegacy, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting the protection of the world's oceans through storytelling, with her partner, Canadian photographer Paul Nicklen. She founded the prestigious International League of Conservation Photographers to help provide a platform for photographers working on environmental issues. She's been named Smithsonian Conservation Photographer of the Year. She's one of National Geographic's 2018 Adventurers of the Year. And she's also the first female photojournalist to ever reach 1 million followers on Instagram. We talk about swimming in icy Norwegian waters with orcas, floating beside an American crocodile in Cuba, the heartbreaking video that she filmed of a starving polar bear last year, and what it will truly take to save our oceans. I really enjoyed my conversation with Cristina. We cover a lot of topics. I hope you enjoy it too. So without further ado, here it is, my chat with the one and only Cristina Mittermeier. Well, Cristina, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Anybody that has listened to any episodes of this podcast know that I bring you and Paul up probably every single episode, and you guys are just such a huge inspiration for me doing my work, and having you on is an absolute dream. So thank you so much for taking the time.
And I am so honored and thrilled because everybody's talking about your podcast. And, I was wondering who the whiz behind this idea is, and it's lovely to meet you as well.
Well, thank you so much. I noticed you just welcomed some new members to the family.
I'm such a big animal lover, and growing up in Mexico, I actually grew with a pack of dogs. My mom always kept up to 10 terriers.
Oh my God.
And so I've always had dogs, and Paul has as well, but it's been so crazy busy, so much travel, and we didn't feel like we could have animals. Mm-hmm. And then friends of ours in Mexico found these 2 strays, and they were starving. So they brought them in, they fed them, they took them to the vet, and then they offered to give them to us on adoption. And so they've come from Mexico on an airplane. We picked them up the day before yesterday, and they're wreaking havoc in our lives.
How old are they? Are they older dogs?
No, they're super young. One of them is 3 years old. The other one is 11 months old. And, they're strays. And so they're used to doing things their way. And they run away. They're super picky eaters. They want to pee in the middle of the night. It's like training a puppy.
Do you get the sense that they're stoked to have food out all the time and things like that? Or do you feel like they're missing their freedom at all?
That was my assumption. I'm like, oh, they must be so grateful. But yesterday we were walking towards the car without leashes, just thinking they're going to get in the car. Mm-hmm. Paul starts the truck, and they both take off running. Just like all of a sudden this little spring in their step, and they are gone. And it took us maybe an hour to find them. So they were just, I don't know, probably they thought they were going back to Mexico. I don't know.
Well, we were talking right before we got started about how incredible the growth of SeaLegacy has been over the course of, it was only founded in 2015, 2016, right?
2014, actually. His Royal Highness Prince Albert of Monaco invited us to the museum, the Oceanographic Museum in Monaco, mm-hmm. which is, Jacques Cousteau's workplace, basically.
Yeah.
To launch SeaLegacy officially. So that was the first official event that we had.
And I think when I started seeing if you would come to the podcast, I was looking at your website and there was like 3 employees. And then as of now, there looks to be close to 25. What do you think is the messaging around SeaLegacy that's really resonating with people? And what is the next 5 years looking like?
Now, I think it's a couple of things. You know, we've been doing environmental work, conservation work in earnest for the past 35, 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think the conservation community in the beginning focused a lot on the science of what's happening to our planet, you know, just biodiversity understanding. And so a lot of money has been invested into scientific baseline work, really.
Mm-hmm.
But when you spend enough time working within the conservation community, you realize that communications has never, until recently, been taken really seriously. I remember even back in the 2000s looking at the budgets, and communications was only like 4% of the overall budget, and 90% of that was fundraising.
Right.
So we have completely neglected sharing with the public just how dire the situation is, not just for extinction, but also for climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And SeaLegacy resonates because our mandate is to communicate. And I've always wanted to communicate in a hopeful, positive way that empowers people to feel like we can still win this instead of defeating, you know, our hopes and dreams with gloom and doom, really.
Yeah. And do you think a lot of that has to do with the fact that technology has progressed to a point where actually being able to capture some of this imagery in a compelling way is so much more accessible, or is a lot of it the realization that storytelling is such a powerful medium to be able to get people to care in the first place?
You know, that's a great question, because it's actually been a confluence of several things. On the one hand, yes, you know, cameras all of a sudden have acquired this enormous power in their sensors and the technology to go to places and capture things that even just 5 years ago we couldn't even dream of.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about, especially underwater photography, it's about 70 years old. That's how long we've been taking pictures of our oceans, and there's 70% of our planet. So much to photograph there.
Yeah.
The other side of it is, until about 5-10 years ago, photographers like myself, you know, you had to kind of get in line behind a very talented cadre of experts, talented photographers, to try to publish your work in places like National Geographic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like lining up to play for the NFL.
Yeah, seriously.
You really are setting yourself to compete with some of the most talented people to ever hold a camera. And so the chance to get your work out there was so much smaller. And now we have social media. And if you build a channel that's authentic enough, that's interesting enough, you can have your own distribution channel open to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week around the world.
It really has revolutionized the way that you can storytell. And I think something that I've always appreciated just looking at the content that you and Paul and everybody associated with SeaLegacy captures, one, there's always that, how the hell are they getting that? Like, how are they that close to a grizzly bear or a sea lion or a sperm whale? But then there's the other side of it too, where what's really difficult in the conservation world is striking the balance between, you want to tell people how dire of a situation it is and that like things are really bad and you want people to care, but ultimately people don't care about things that they don't understand and genuinely feel compassion and empathy towards. So it's like on one side showing the wonder of these creatures and how beautiful the world is, while at the other time saying like, this is great, but it's also not in a good place. So how do you strike that balance, and how intentional are you around telling that narrative?
Completely intentional. You know, I've raised 3 children. One of them is older than you are. And I've watched the school system, especially in the United States, you know, completely abandon the idea of ecological studies.
Yeah.
So kids in school are not learning about how our planet works. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So for me, especially my Instagram feed, is an opportunity to share with my audience a tidbit of ecological information every day, and do it in a way that is relatable, that is not preachy. I'm not trying to talk at anybody, but just, you know, trying to share the wonder. I mean, a lot of my posts begin with a question: can you believe that sperm whales can dive to 10 miles? You know,
right.
I mean, start driving 10 miles towards anywhere.
Yeah.
And imagine that you're a whale going down to the depths. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I watched Blue Planet 2 recently, and there's the video of the sperm whale, and there's the baby sperm whale, and it's just like trying to keep up with its mom to go as deep as it has to go to get food and just can't, and comes up and has to wait. And it's, I mean, the effort that it actually takes those things to get to 10 miles down is crazy.
Imagine. And so recently I was photographing sperm whales in Dominica, and I didn't know that the babies, they have to grow up to be almost a year old before they can actually start diving that deep. So that entire year, they're staying in the surface while their mother goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they stay with a babysitter, but you'll find these baby whales alone. And then one day we're swimming and we see a large pod of false killer whales, or no, pilot whales. These animals eat sperm whales.
Oh God.
I tell you, for days I couldn't sleep thinking about these baby whales all alone in the surface.
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, it's got to be tough in general seeing, like, I saw that photo the other day of the baby penguin that died. And then, like, you have the famous one, obviously probably the most important conservation video of last year with the starving polar bear. It must be hard to think of that baby sperm whale sitting at the top of the ocean, or the baby penguin that's freezing to death, or the polar bear that's starving to death, and capture that, but wanting to help. How do you balance being able to do that? I would imagine it would be an emotional experience.
Especially when you're an animal lover, it's so painful. But, I guess over many years of doing this, you really start to understand that telling those stories and creating that bridge of empathy between people that, somebody that's in their office 9 to 5 and they've never been to the jungle or to the ocean, and an animal that they may never see. And so you try to tell the stories in a way that resonate, in a way that builds a bridge and becomes an empathy bridge, really. And,
Yeah.
You can opt to say a lot of negative things and show pictures of devastation and carnage. I think people are turned away by that. So you have to balance it out: the wonder, the beauty, the majesty, how lucky we are to have this beautiful planet. And then every once in a while, let people know that it's not all okay.
Yeah. And I think, to me, something I always try and harp on and focus on is how, when you really dig into the biology and the behavior patterns of any specific animal, but especially these large sentient beings that are in the ocean, like whales and dolphins, etc., when you really understand that they have lives that are very similar to our own, they have families, they have emotions, they have fights and arguments and triumphs and tribulations, I think that's such an important story to tell, so that people don't think that they're just these programmed people who don't have a consciousness and going around. I thought that your experience with sperm whales would help to tell that a little bit, because I noticed you were saying that there were 10 plus pods that you were noticing of families interacting. Can you speak a little bit to that, and the fact that these are sentient beings and the emotional connection you can see amongst those animals?
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing that strikes me the most whenever I dive into a new species that I'm just beginning to photograph and understand, and you hang out with experts and you start learning a lot of things that, they're not out there in the literature. People have no idea. Family groups, for cetaceans especially, are so important. A female oftentimes will never separate from her daughters. Like, the female calves stay with the mother throughout their life. The boys, eventually, when they become annoying teenagers, get kicked out and the males become solitary. But you see these pods, and they're depending, there's pods that are 12, 20 animals. There's pods that are only 3, 4 animals. And these are families that every once in a while come together and they socialize, and you can see the excitement when they find each other, when they come close, they rub against each other, they talk, they chatter, they play, almost like dogs. And, the last day that I was there, something spectacular happened. All of a sudden, we didn't see just a group of 10. We started seeing like 30, 40 sperm whales all together, and they were all booking it. They're traveling fast. And so we started wondering, where are they going? We got a phone call from a fisherman, a guy in a different island in Martinique, 100 kilometers away, who said that orcas were coming in. And somehow these animals so far away knew that they had to get out of there because there were orcas coming. And orcas, of course, eat and hunt sperm whales. So the things that are happening in the ocean that we have no understanding of, for me, that is the biggest thing, right? Like, we don't understand how our planet works, and we should be so much more careful with it.
Yeah, and knowing that they're hearing that and understanding that through all the ocean noise between all the riggers that are going on. I remember, I think I was talking to Tony Wu about it. He was saying how they didn't really realize until after 9/11 was the first time that they were actually forced to stop a lot of the ocean traffic that was going on. And they did a study that recognized that humpback whales communicated with each other so much further than they ever expected, that it's really sad to think that when that started again, there's all these solitary animals that meet up for these certain aggregation moments every year, and they're like calling out to nobody, which is super sad to think about.
Exactly. And that's, I was talking to Adrian Grenier, the founder of Lonely Whale, last week.
Entourage.
Yeah, I know. I asked them where the name Lonely Whale came from, and that's exactly where it came from. You know, these whales
really?
that are not being able to communicate because there's so much noise. And I was sharing with them saying, you know, the first time I heard a humpback whale sing was in Hawaii. I was just on the beach and I put my head underwater, and all of a sudden you can hear these whales singing. And the scientists there explained to me that every year the males come to Maui, and one male will start singing a song, and it'll have a certain melody and a certain, you know, chorus, whatever. Within a few months, every single whale around the world will be singing the same song. So these animals are having an underwater symphony that we are not privy to, and they're all communicating over vast distances in the ocean, singing. You know?
That's insane, like literally insane. And that, I mean, to think of how many other instances of crazy mind-blowing phenomenon like that are going on that we don't even comprehend yet. It's amazing.
Marvelous, isn't it? And for me, you remember that scene in the movie Racing Extinction when that last little Hawaiian bird is called
the Kauai'o.
He is the last one, and there's nobody there to answer his call. I mean, I sobbed in the movie theater just thinking how sad that is that we allow that to happen. And I think about now Japan wanting to open, you know, the commercial whaling thing as if it was okay to go and eat whales. You know, these are animals that are sharing this planet with us. They're fellow passengers in a tiny spaceship, and we're all alone in the universe. Yeah,
and I think in Racing Extinction too, to parlay on that, I can never pronounce that guy's name, like Louis Saihoyos.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Saihoyos, is that close enough?
I call him Pisoyos. So he answers to all of those.
Yes, but I mean, unbelievable rock star of a filmmaker. But he was talking about how there was the Chinese river dolphin, I think it was, and that there was like only a handful left, and the entire time he just kind of assumed somebody would take care of it because it's such a beautiful animal. There's 30 to 40 left in the world. Like somebody has to do something. And I read a really funny caption. It's not funny, but an interesting caption of yours where you said, I'm a Mexican citizen who is now living in Canada, and I've created a new term for the word selfie. And correct me if I'm saying this, it's someone else. Can you remind me what it was? Do you remember?
Of course, yeah. You know, I love living in Canada, and Canadians are very peculiar the way they speak. They're absolutely lovely. So selfie stands for someone else is likely fixing it, eh? That is quintessential Canadian. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest environmental problem that we have, and that is the assumption that our government is taking care of us, that corporations are being responsible, that surely somebody must be doing something about this. And as you learn about one extinction episode after another, you realize that nobody is. There's a handful of heroes out there doing conservation work, and a lot of these species are sliding into extinction without anybody even knowing.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so powerful about the work that you guys are doing is you are taking it into your own hands and combating governments themselves. I think what's so awesome is in a lot of your campaigns and your programming, it's like, yes, look at this visual, here's the story, but this is an issue directly tied to this story that you can help to support. And I mean, how many signatures did you get for the Iceland whale hunt? It was through the roof. Oh my
God. Yeah. So within a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, we get, you know, almost 500,000 signatures, tweets or whatever. And we've done that several times. We did it for Iceland. We've done it in Norway to stop oil drilling, and with a lot of success. As soon as the elections stopped, the the new elected prime minister decided to extend the moratorium on oil drilling for another 4 years. And then we did it in California with the drift nets. We helped a group of organizations do something that they had been trying to do for 20 years, and that is to phase out drift nets from California waters.
Which was insane in the first place that was even going on. I saw that, and I live in California, and California totes itself as probably the most progressive place in America, and everybody in California will be happy to tell you that themselves. But when I heard that, I mean, that is such an archaic practice that I was so upset when I heard it. And then I think it was only like 3 or 4 weeks later that they're like, oh yeah, it's going to stop. Is it out of practice now or soon?
And so they have to phase it out over a number of months and years, just because there's a huge investment in the vessels and in the nets, and you have to give fishermen a chance to transition, and that's fair enough. But to me, it's the bigger myth, the myth that the fishing sector is such a huge source of revenue for countries. And I feel like the bigger source of revenue these days is actually tourism. Mm-hmm. And we need to dispel the myth of the noble fisherman out there, because I mean, I went to school to study fisheries in the 1990s. And when I graduated, in the 1980s, when I graduated, we were learning the industrial process for canning sea turtle meat, if you can believe that. It was still sold in grocery stores in Mexico. And it's changed, things that were once okay become unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And we have to keep pushing for this idea that the oceans are not infinite. We cannot continue to throw stuff in the water and extract resources like if there was, infinite number of fish. We have actually already caught 90% of the big fish in the ocean. It's a terrifying thought.
Yeah, horrible thought. But I think what's really powerful in what you said is that it's not, I think oftentimes when you are a compassionate person and you want to take part in conservation and protecting species, there's this myth that you don't understand that there's another side of the story, and that there are these industries that are tied to fishing, et cetera. And that's why Sean Heinrichs, who I saw you were just in Papua with, that story about what they did with the manta rays was so powerful to me, because I looked at that story and it said, here's this small village that has been focused on hunting manta rays for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that's really their way of life. And then Asian influence started to come in, and they started hunting at much more exponential level than they were before. And all of a sudden the manta rays started to plummet. But I was very sympathetic to the fact of, how do you go in there and tell these people to stop doing what they've been doing for thousands of years? And I thought it was so powerful that when in the documentary Racing Extinction, Sean goes in and Paul Hilton goes in and they build ecotourism up, they get government grants in there, they talk about sustainable fisheries. So it's not like you're ignoring the other side of these arguments when this is going on,
No, I think the real thing to understand is, for me, artisanal local fishing is actually the way to go. Mm-hmm. You will always realize that when there's a local fishery that is managed by the local fishermen, they are actually very careful, because that is their livelihood. When you make any animal a commodity, be it fish or trophy hunting, bears, whatever, whenever you put a price tag on an animal at an industrial, commercial, international level, it's completely unsustainable. Mm-hmm. And so the manta ray sustainable fishing, when you're trying to feed, 200 people, it's not a big deal. When you start exporting it and turn it into a commodity for China, right, it becomes a big problem.
Yeah. How do you distinguish of all the problems going on in the conservation world, even when you're focused specifically on oceans? You and Paul and your team, like, you only have so many people, you only have so much funding to tell certain stories. How do you decide which stories to tell and go about doing that?
We struggle with this a lot. I'm a yes person. So mm-hmm. anybody that brings me a story, I'm like, yes. Sean Heinrich is the same.
Right.
So my team, my staff, which is very professional and they're amazing, they've actually created decision-making matrix, so that we can decide things that, first of all, things that we can actually win. Things where SeaLegacy's strength, which is to be an amplifying organization, plays really well. We usually require that there's actually one or more local conservation groups that are going to help us champion this cause over the long mm-hmm. run. So a whole series of prerequisites. And then, of course, it has to be something that we can actually visually communicate.
Does one story stand out in particular as the most fun and exciting, or maybe even the most like suspenseful and nerve-wracking one that you've done?
You know, every once in a while, I actually have to remind myself that I'm working because I love my job so much and it's so much fun that even when I'm diving in the ice and it's freezing, I'm having a great time. But I have to say that very few things are as life-changing as the opportunity to swim with wild orcas. Here in British Columbia, orcas are very skittish. They've been, shy to be near people for a long time. So you put your fin in the water and there's orcas, they're gone. But in Norway, they come into the fjords to feed on the herring, and they're so focused on what they're eating that they don't care that you're in the water with them. And, you'll find yourself in these situations where there's 10, 20 orcas around you, and they're so close to you. They come and check you out. You can see their eye. And there's nothing more thrilling than to have an orca come, get in front of you and echolocate you. And you can feel how they're, projecting this echolocation on your body. It feels incredible. So no, that's probably the most fun one could hope to have.
Was there any fear in doing that?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I talked to so many folks who do similar work, and for me, it's always shocking how Paul is a perfect example. I remember looking at his photos and I'd be like, how does anybody get that close to a grizzly bear? Because you can understand how there's certain ways, like especially when you go up and you see the ice grizzlies in Canada or something, you can position yourself in water so that they can't come and attack you, and like you're in the certain space. I watched one video where he had to be, the grizzly bear was like 5 feet away from him and he was just taking photos. I was like, how is he not terrified? I would imagine that there must be either you're completely comfortable with the animal behavior or you're just numb to that, or you're just good at hiding it.
There's a couple of ways of looking at that. I would say, especially in the case of Paul, he's such a keen naturalist and has spent so much time with animals in nature that he reads their signs very well. The more time you spend with wild creatures, the more you realize that they're trying to communicate all the time with their body language, with their attitude. And if you're respectful and if you're willing to put in the time and wait for whatever animal it is to be the one that dictates how comfortable it is with you there, eventually they'll come close. In the case of grizzly bears, they're very aware all the time that humans are there. But we're not in the menu, they don't eat humans. And oftentimes, you're spending time with them along the edge of the rivers. And as long as you can see how they communicate, when a bear wants you out of the way, you better listen. If a bear doesn't want you to be close enough, then you have to give it space. Somebody like Timothy Treadwell, he paid with his life for thinking that he had a special relationship with animals. Wild animals are wild animals. And for me...
Who is that? Sorry?
Timothy Treadwell.
I don't know that story.
He was a grizzly bear advocate who lived in Alaska with grizzly bears for a long time, and he ended up being killed.
Is it the grizzly man guy?
The grizzly man guy, yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
So we try not to be that silly, but I will say this. If I'm in a situation where I'm feeling a little scared, I know I'm in the right place, because nobody will have that picture I have just because it's terrifying.
No, I can imagine. I always think that moment when you first enter into the water where you know that there's these massive orcas must just be beyond explanation as to what that feels like.
Yeah, the first time I did it, Paul and I, he was on assignment for National Geographic and I was assisting him. And the congregation of orcas happens in the dead of winter in the northern fjords of Norway. So they get about 12 minutes of daylight a day. Oh, wow. And so you leave whatever you're staying on a boat or in town in the dark, and you're in this little zodiac, and it's big, rough North Sea up there. So you're pitching and buckling. Eventually you find the orcas, and now you have to get in the water, and it's like ink.
Yeah.
Paul gets in the water, and I'm like, okay, I have a decision to make. I either follow or I'm going to be left behind, and in I go. I'm thinking if it's my day to go, I'm going to make a very good headline.
Yeah. Well, is that what drew you to Paul? Do you have a moment where you're like, I was working with him and then all of a sudden it took a little shift?
I think it was the other way around. We were working together in the Great Bear Rainforest on that story that he did for National Geographic on spirit bears.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I had 10 photographers from the International League of Conservation Photographers, and we were doing a whole expose portfolio of what the impact of an oil spill would be on the Great Bear Rainforest if a pipeline was built through the rainforest. And I was trekking the forest with Paul, and I'd never seen a wild black bear in my life before. So we bent the corner and we come up on this big male, and I saw this animal and it was so beautiful, and he's 2 feet away from us. I just started crying, just so happy. And I think that's when Paul realized that, I might be a good match for him.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's funny. I just had Shannon Wild on the podcast last week, and Russell McLaughlin was on earlier. And I was talking at the time that you must have incredible sacrifices as an individual to do the work that you do. Because, I mean, how often are you actually home? And to be able to share that with somebody who's in the same line of work must be incredibly rare. And to be able to do what you do while not having that stress of not being with the person you love is pretty amazing.
Well, I think for Paul and I, we both come from very long previous marriages. Mm-hmm. I have 2 children and a stepchild from my previous marriage. And the sacrifice really is, I mean, they're the ones that pay the price to do what we do. You basically are leaving a trail behind you of neglected partners and abandoned children. And you end up paying the price as well. And how many photographers do we know that end up being divorced and because they just can't maintain a relationship? So Paul and I are lucky because we spend a lot of time together. I sometimes think too much time together. But we're lucky, that we actually get to do this passionate work as a couple.
Do you ever feel the opposite in the sense that while you might not be scared for yourself, you're scared for him when he's putting himself in certain situations?
He's such a competent diver and he's such a good naturalist that I almost never feel scared for him. He tends to be a little bit of a cowboy sometimes, going on dangerous dives on his own. And I worry about him, but I also know that if it was his turn to go that way, he would die totally happy. So he's not afraid of the consequences of being out there, and neither am I. I'd rather die out there than in a car crash, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave my children. So I tend to be a lot more careful than he is. He has no kids. So. Yeah,
but I mean, that's a heavy thing to say nonetheless.
It is, but one that you have to think about, really. I mean, it is dangerous work, oftentimes in remote areas where there's no medical facilities. I mean, people ask me why I work out, and the only reason really is to be able to rescue myself, to be strong enough to do something on my own behalf.
Yeah, because even something that wouldn't be cause for serious medical alarm here, if you're out in the middle of nowhere without any ambulances or hospitals nearby, that can get pretty serious pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you think about how heavy the equipment is to do dry suit diving in cold, like in the Antarctic or in the Arctic. You're wearing big, heavy equipment. It's big seas. The ocean is seldom calm and happy. Most of the time it's very violent. And so you're trying to get out of a boat and put yourself back in a vessel that is bucking in the surf. And you have to be really cool. You have to be comfortable, good swimmer.
I've always wondered that. This is probably a dumb question, but is there a big difference in animal behavior when it's stormy weather, like once you get like 5 feet below the ocean, or is it pretty similar when it's storming versus normal weather?
I think it's a species by species. So when we were with the sperm whales just now, I learned a lot from the expert that we had on the boat with us, because he would say things like, oh, the wind has shifted, and all of a sudden all the sperm whales started breaching. I didn't even know that sperm whales were capable of propelling themselves completely out of the water to breach. And he would say things like, okay, now the weather's going to change, they're going to move. Like, how does he know? Right. But sure enough, but the truth of the matter is, you can get in the water and it can be pretty violent in the surface. And once you are, 10, 20 feet below, it's pretty calm. It's a different world.
Can you walk me through? I've seen some of your setup in preparation for going on these excursions, and it's like 8 people, 30,000 cameras. I can't imagine how many hard drives you're bringing with you. Can you walk me through? Let's use the starving polar bear example. You're in British Columbia. You're setting up for this experience. How do you get there? How long are you there? What's that experience like, trying to find that polar bear, to capturing that and actually bring that footage home?
I mean, first of all, the most expensive part of any expedition is the boat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, depending on the rust bucket you get, it can cost $2,000 a day up to $10,000 a day. Boats are expensive because most of them still run on fossil fuels, right? So to get to locations, we oftentimes have to leave and jump through several airports. We oftentimes have to clear a carnet for, you know, the amount of equipment that we're bringing.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the last part of a trip is usually painful, like you're in a small boat or in a rusty bus or some way to get to where you're going. And we take a lot of people with us because you need people that are dedicated to downloading digital media. Paul especially shoots with 8K red cameras. It's a very dense digital medium, so it takes a long time to download and process. We need people that are charging and cleaning and making sure that things are working. We need somebody that's dedicated to flying drones. You need to have permits and special licenses to be a drone pilot. So, and you know, most people think, oh, you're going somewhere. You could be diving and shooting surface and doing interviews and flying drones. And the truth of the matter is you can't. You really have to focus on one thing. And Paul is a really good director. He's good at just dividing the work. And he'll say something to me like, okay, you're going to go and, you know, spend 8 hours over there and you're going to be doing split photography. And he will send somebody else to dive over there. And, you know, so we split and do a lot of work.
Why did you decide on oceans? I mean, I've seen you do a lot of things that aren't necessarily specific to oceans in your previous accomplishments. Was there something that the oceans specifically are the most important cause to be looking at now? Or is it something that's a particular passion of yours in the grand, like, climate change, conservation scheme of things?
Yeah, I mean, when I started my career as a marine biologist, climate change was nothing that was even in anybody's radar. But for me, the fascination with the ocean started when I was a little girl. And I have an older brother. And, you know, my dad was like a boy's boy. And so he bought him these big series of pirate books. And my brother, of course, he's a boy's boy too. He wouldn't read them. So I would sneak into his room to read his books. And it was just amazing adventure story, pirates in Malaysia. And, you know, there were tigers and sharks and these rainforests. And the whole description to me, it was so amazing. And I think that's when I first fell in love with the idea of adventure and the ocean. Because I didn't grow up in the ocean. I grew up in the mountains.
When it comes to protecting the oceans in general, I think even being in conservation, for me, the thing that always is hard is a lot of this seems insurmountable, right? The doom and gloom rhetoric that's being spread. And I'm always thinking to myself, how much does it actually matter if I'm using one more plastic bottle in the grand scheme of things? Can you talk, and I know a big initiative is the 19 things you can do for oceans in 2019, which is awesome. And I'll link that in the show notes for everybody that wants to see some tangible steps that you can take to help the oceans. But if you were an individual living in a city, working a 9-to-5 job, what are the things that can actually make a difference? Or even for yourself, when you're trying to figure out what causes I'm looking at and what stories I want to tell, are there large wins that you think are low-hanging fruit that could have massive impact, either bureaucratically or even on an individual level?
I actually do. You know, a huge reason that I do the work I do is because I have 3 kids and they're you know, young adults like you. What I notice about them is that they are part of that generation that feels so, you know, desperate and depressed about what's happening. And it must feel like things are not moving fast enough to save the world that they are inheriting. And, you know, for me, the choice of doing photography as opposed to anything else is because when I was working in conservation, I often felt that it's such an elitist thing, to be an environmentalist. It's almost like you need a degree to understand what the conversation is about. And if you don't know enough about something, oftentimes you don't want to engage.
Mm-hmm.
But through photography, it's like we're lowering the entry fee to the conversation. We're all photographers. We all have a device in our hands that we use to share the story of what's happening around us. And so I wanted to build something that, first of all, felt hopeful, because there is a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things that are happening out there, and they require mass public support to be pushed, over a tipping point. And we can talk about what those things are. I can think about renewable energy or stopping divesting from fossil fuels. There's a lot that's happening that we can all support with our voices and our vote and our wallets. But the other thing I wanted to do was just invite people to participate, to say, by becoming part of SeaLegacy, it's not that I'm taking your $5, it's I'm inviting you to invest in solutions. And my job is to go out there and figure out who's doing what, that we can actually join together and invest in creating change. I was really inspired by Paul Hawken's book, Drawdown, because he lists, 100 ways that we can be drawing carbon down from the atmosphere every day. And I found great inspiration in that. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to do. So, for example, for SeaLegacy, it's a huge part of the work that we're going to be doing is promoting the idea of blue carbon. It's the recognition that ecosystems that are already there, mangroves, seagrasses, salt marshes, they absorb 4 times more carbon than any terrestrial ecosystem. So why wouldn't we protect them? So we're trying to work with local conservation groups in many countries, trying to help them to get the idea across the policymakers that actually create these protections. So it's actually not that difficult. We just need a lot of voices supporting it.
Yeah, and I think that's really encouraging. And that's something I really liked about Project Drawdown too, is that it's very tangible. Like, this is the problem, but these are things that we can do to help make an impact on that.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll get an email from somebody that criticizes me because to do my work, I actually have to fly. Therefore, I'm part of the problem.
Oh, God.
And I think, what? Me, lonely little self, taking a flight to go do my work, I'm not the problem. The problem are these massive corporations, the government, the military. They're the ones that are actually, consuming and producing enormous amounts of carbon. And I feel like, I'll give you an example. The other day, my neighbor comes down to my yard, and Paul and I are just working in the yard, trying to clean up our winter, whatever. And he comes and he starts telling us, in his opinion, well, climate change is not really a problem because it's a cyclical thing, so it'll take care of itself. And I'm like, so now in addition to working in a lumber yard, you're also a climatologist. I didn't know. And like, we have taken the conversation to a place where people who know nothing about science feel like they're totally, able to give a professional opinion.
I also just never understood the mentality of what drives somebody to be like, I'm going to go talk to my 2 neighbors who are doing incredible work around trying to help make the world a better place and make them know that I don't agree with what they're talking about. Like, that's going to have any impact. It's just a weird way to go about living your life.
But you'd be surprised, how many people feel empowered to have those types of opinions. So the solution to that is to be the majority of voices that say, no, it's not okay to doubt that the scientists know what they're doing and what they're talking about, and that we all are part of the solution. And I'm always upset when people, speak against renewable energy because it's not happening fast enough or because it's too expensive. I'm thinking, if we all supported it a little more, the transition to renewable energy would happen a lot faster. So for myself, even though I could probably drive my regular car for another 5 years, I'm going to trade it in for an electric.
Yeah.
Because I am willing to put my wallet where my mouth is. I don't want to be part of the fossil fuel economy anymore.
And I think a lot of that too is inviting the other people to the conversation. I think particularly in America, one of the biggest problems is that when you do disagree on those fundamental levels, there's not even the capability to get to the table and have a discussion around, maybe even if we're not right, it's still smart to take these steps and then we can figure out if it's going in the right direction or not. Or why don't you come down and we'll talk about why the science that I'm looking at might be more accurate than what you're looking at, and talking, but like in talking about it, because I think that's something that's drastically missing from culture in general right now is it's
Absolutely.
these identity politics where if I don't agree with you, then all of a sudden I don't want to be your friend. And that's a really
that is
weird
ridiculous.
way of living.
But to answer your questions, the thing that we all can do every day is just care a little more to understand our world a little better.
Mhm.
Like I was buying dog food for my new pets. And as I'm going down the aisle, I'm realizing that all this dog food has wild fish in it. And I'm thinking, whenever in the history of the planet did dogs eat fish?
Yeah.
Why are we mining our oceans of the last fish that live in the ocean to feed our dogs? It's absurd. And I talked to the owner of the pet shop and she had never even thought about it. So I feel, okay, now I have an opportunity on my feed to actually ask pet owners to pay more attention to that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I completely stopped eating farmed salmon just because I saw that photo that you posted. And that was one of the most disgusting things that I'd ever
Isn't it
looked
pretty
at.
gross, And, these days, I think the other thing we all can do a little more of is to be a little more outspoken. So I'm not shy at all to ask a waiter, why am I being given a straw? I didn't ask for one.
Mm-hmm.
And they usually are taken a little aback, but if enough of us are willing to raise our voice and ask, where did this fish come from? I think, together we can start driving the conversation in a different direction. And you don't have to be rude. You don't have to be a jerk.
Right.
It's just having the courage to speak up for the kind of planet we want to live in.
Yes, totally agreed. I want to go and talk about a few specific videos and photos that I've seen of yours and just get a little bit more of the backstory as to what was going on there.
Sure.
The first was showing you and you were wearing flippers and swimming right beside, I don't know if it was an alligator or a crocodile, but it looked a lot closer than I'd ever like to be to an alligator or crocodile. Can you explain what was going on there, where you were, and what that experience was like?
Absolutely. So that was an American crocodile. There's 26 species of crocodilians around the world. And in the Americas, we actually have 4 or 5. The American crocodile is not even the biggest one. But the photo was taken in Cuba in a place called the Gardens of the Queen. And this is a series of mangroves and coral reefs that are about 8 hours away from Cuba on the southern part that have been protected since 1984. Fidel Castro, for all his faults and crimes against humanity, actually was a quite good conservationist, and so he established a system of protected areas on land and in the ocean. And because it's been protected for so long, the coral reef is intact and the mangroves are incredible. So when you dive in the Gardens of the Queen, you will see everything that you would expect to see in a healthy living coral ecosystem. And so we wanted to kind of use this particular place as the baseline for what healthy looks like. And then try to share that with other countries that are, striving to create marine protections for themselves. And what's happening right now, and it is a unique moment in history, is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that a lot of corporations and a lot of governments are following. And goal number 14 has to do with protecting the oceans. And all the countries that are signatories to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity have actually agreed, the ones that have oceans, to protect 10% of their coastal waters or their oceans by 2020. So Cuba's already protected 35%.
Oh, wow.
But there's many other countries in the Caribbean that have not protected any at all. And so we wanted to share with them, okay, this is what a healthy marine protected area can do for the economy, for the ecology of a place. For Cuba, there's a lobster fishery within the Gardens of the Queen. It's the third most important export for the island.
Wow.
I know. And these are free-ranging lobsters that are scientifically harvested,
Yeah.
And it's a great source of economic revenue for the local community.
And what about getting into the water with that alligator? Was that scary?
Well, there was a time in my life when I actually had a fascination with crocodilians. So I actually studied crocodiles for a long time. And I've been in the water with a lot of species of crocodiles. Most of them are pretty mellow and shy. Crocodiles are ambush predators, so they don't like to attack you head on.
Yeah.
They will wait for you to come to a body of water. Like you see that the videos of the Nile crocodiles that are catching the little gazelles in Africa. They're waiting in hiding, right? But if the crocodile knows that you've already seen it and that you are kind of aware of its presence, it generally will not attack you.
Oh, interesting.
This particular crocodile is very used to having people in the water, and it's not that big. I mean, it's not an animal that could take a person down. So I was not really worried about it.
I feel like for all the animals that I've seen photographers and videographers go in and film, I've always had an obsession with the crocodile because I can vividly remember my childhood home and I was sitting on the living room and I watched this episode of Steve Irwin jump off of a boat at nighttime into infested waters that had to have 20 or 30 crocodiles. And as a kid, I registered in my mind, I was like, this is the most badass human being of all time. And I genuinely think like all of my desire to get into wildlife conservation all stemmed from Steve Irwin. And my only like true memory of watching him when I was a kid was that exact scene. So it was very reminiscent of that when I saw your photo with that croc.
You're not the only one. My firstborn son, Mick Mittermeier, fascinated with Steve Irwin, such a fan, and he too has gone on to pursue a career in wildlife and conservation because of Steve. And when he was little, he would say things to me like, I want to be an animal talker. And I thought that he wanted to talk to animals. No, he wanted to be on camera talking about animals.
Yeah, he was an amazing, amazing man.
Yes, he was.
Is there if you could say one animal that you've filmed that would be unexpected for most? Like a lot of people think grizzlies, orcas, sperm whales, obviously they're gorgeous, magnificent animals. Is there one specific species that sticks out to you as being particularly endearing or just something that you had a particularly interesting experience with?
You know, I actually love jellyfish, and I love them for interesting reasons. They're survivors and they're very prehistoric, and you know they can survive almost any type of circumstance, you know. So jellyfish, when there's a lot of food in the water, they can feed non-stop, and they feed up and down the food chain. So they can eat animals that are bigger and more evolved than they are, and they can eat the eggs of almost all the other animals. When there's no food, they can make their bodies shrink to about 20% of their body mass, so they can become smaller so that they don't have to eat so much. And when there's a lot of food, you know, they can reproduce sexually, so males and females. But when there's not enough food, they can clone themselves.
Really?
I know. So they're like these alien animal out there in the ocean. And the thing about jellyfish is they take advantage of bodies of water that are disrupted, you know, that are not on ecologically well balanced. And once a body of water becomes infested with jellyfish, it almost never recovers. So, you know, that's not true of all jellyfish. There's those famous lakes in Palau that have the freshwater jellyfish, and, you know, they're totally harmless. But yeah, jellyfish, I find that they're an interesting canary in the coal mine for the bad things happening to the ocean when you find them in large concentrations, feeding on every single creature up and down the food chain.
It makes me feel a little bit bad because I always have an ongoing joke that I tell people that as much as I'm a conservationist and care about animals, I would not care if all jellyfish were gone.
They're so pretty.
I'm always like, what do? They float around and just hurt people and don't think very much. But now I feel bad about that perspective, and it's
some of them sting for sure.
Yes, I've had too many stings growing up as a kid swimming in the ocean.
Where? On the East Coast?
I grew up on Cape Cod.
Oh, yeah.
In Massachusetts, which is a really interesting place now because when I was growing up, there was never any great white sharks, but they put a protection out on seals, and now there's a ton of seals, and there's great whites everywhere on Cape Cod, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, but I remember the first time I was like, what? How could that happen? Because one got stuck in a little harbor. And then since then, now I think there's hundreds of them over there, which is pretty cool.
We also have gotten a lot better at finding them and then keeping track of them. So we think there's many more. We just know where they are.
I also saw there's that video that went viral this week of Whan Sharks and Ocean Ramsey. Did you see this?
I did see it, yeah.
I didn't know people actually swam with great whites.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
And Ocean herself, you know, she is so committed to helping with the tagging of wild sharks, and has been doing it for a long time. And I've had the fortune of swimming with sharks with Ocean, and she did a great job of explaining how to do it safely, how to do it in a way that doesn't harm the animals. And both she and Whan are very gentle, caring. They really are trying so hard to create to build of empathy between sharks and humans. And, they were heavily criticized for that video. A lot of people jumped on them. And that reminded me a little bit of what happened when Paul and I put that polar bear, the starving polar bear video out there.
Why people were criticizing you for that?
Oh, of us? Terribly.
Why?
It's very funny, because we put out the photograph and we knew that the bear was dying because we didn't know why, assuming that it had been injured. But it was interesting how people inserted their own fears and their own anxieties on climate change into the story.
Mm-hmm.
Media outlets invented, background stories on climate change.
Yeah.
And when you go back and read on it, it was just fascinated how people inserted their own story and their own anxiety and fear into the image. It's
a weird thing where when you see the wildfires picking up in California and the mass heats here and the hurricanes picking up in intensity, et cetera, it's hard to say, I can equate this specific event to climate change. But at the same time, you're like, a lot more of these events are happening than used to be happening.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that I look at it as really the biggest threat that humankind has ever faced to its existence.
Yeah.
And people almost are like so easy to call bullshit on like anytime you want to talk about it, that it's really odd. And I don't understand what it is, but I was talking to Jeremy Hance, who is he's a journalist for Manga Bay. And he was telling me that in journalism, it's a big thing where you don't even want to talk about climate change because the second people read it, all of a sudden your clicks and your read through rate drops through the roof because people have just developed this incredibly apathetic disposition towards it. And I don't understand why that is, but.
Oh, I can explain it to you.
Yeah? What is it? No, I want to.
There's and I hope you'll Google it. It's something called the Overton window. And that is, James Overton was a public pundit, and he came up with the concept of this window of the window of public discourse that the American public is willing to have. And so this window moves to the left or to the right. And there has been a huge investment of billions of dollars to move that public discourse way to the right, where people feel that it's okay to doubt science and to, say horrible things about immigrants and to be xenophobic. And all of these things have become normal because the discourse has moved that far to the right. So I feel like a huge part of my job is to communicate in a way that moves the discourse back to the middle, especially when it comes to the environment. Climate change is real, it's not up for debate. Just like you don't question your cardiologist when it's about to open your chest,
Right. Right.
We shouldn't be questioning the climatologists that are telling us that this is, a humanity calamity, that, it's the most important overarching issue of this generation. And I feel compelled to do everything I can to address it. And I admire people like Governor Jay Inslee, who's, as a politician, is not afraid to make climate change his platform. Because it really has to be at the forefront of everything we think and do every day.
Speaking of platforms, you recently became the first female photojournalist to reach 1 million subscribers on Instagram, which is an incredible feat. And congratulations, first and foremost.
Thank you.
What does how does that feel as an accomplishment for somebody who works in media and knows how hard it is to get any amount of following? I'm like mind blown with how anybody could ever get 1 million. But secondly, do you feel like a certain weight with that, in the sense that you now have this platform and such an incredible opportunity to be able to genuinely make such an impact on a huge scale, that there must be a certain sense of responsibility that comes with that as well?
What I love about the growth of a social media channel is that it's not a linear process. It's actually exponential. So the more people like you or like whatever you're doing, the more people will like what you're doing. It just really grows that way.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not about ego or about, growing my brand or making it about me or, sponsors or any of that. For me, it really is about having a bigger audience. photography is never the thing that I set out to do. What I really want to do is change the planet and change the way we relate to the natural world. And that channel, those million followers, are a massive audience of people that are very passionate, very engaged. I love the comments that they leave on my feed. Whenever there's a debate, I love how people have that debate on the feed. And to me, it's the precise conversation that we need to be having. So it makes me really happy to have this massive audience that is interested in what I'm saying and what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing, amazing thing. And I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, something that's always interested me in your work, particularly around your TED Talk, but also I've noticed you spent a lot of time in indigenous cultures, the concept of enoughness, where living in the social media age, at least for me, I think I oftentimes get way too wrapped up in the how many followers do I have? How much money am I making? Where am I paying rent? Am I doing well enough comparatively to the people I graduated with? All of these things. Whereas I always look back and all the moments that I'm happiest have very little to do with those things that I place most of my time and attention towards. Can you talk a little bit about what enoughness is and kind of where the genesis of that concept came from?
Yeah, I mean, the concept really was born out of spending time with indigenous people and realizing that precise thing that you just said, that we put the label of poverty on people. And it is a label that we own. They don't own it because in so many indigenous cultures, there's not even the concept of money doesn't exist. They seem to be content and even happy. There's a lot of laughter and singing, even when they have nothing and they have so little.
Yeah.
And so it got me thinking, why do I feel like I'm part of that rat race, that I have to have the latest pair of shoes and compete with the next person on how much money I'm making versus that person. And I started thinking about the idea of purpose around enoughness. Enoughness is not just learning to live with less and finding happiness within stuff that has nothing to do with material wealth. It's also finding your purpose in life. And, that brings me to a concept that the Japanese call ikigai. Is, the sense of being. It's a sense of purpose. So when you find a thing that you really love, and it's also a thing that you're really good at, but it's also a thing that you can make a living from, and it's also a thing that is good for the planet, the confluence of those four things, that's your ikigai, that's your sense of purpose. That's the only thing that's going to bring you to that sense of enoughness.
It's your North Star.
It becomes your North Star. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to my friend about this yesterday, how to me, in thinking through that all, and especially living in a city like Los Angeles, where you're just, as much as I do wildlife work, 99% of my time, I'm stuck in traffic all day long and I'm hearing cars driving by and I'm alone, working remotely in my office. It's really hard for me sometimes to gain that perspective as to what truly makes me happy. And ultimately, I think what it comes down to is having that North Star that you enjoy. As long as I'm taking a journey that's getting me there, if I ever get to the North Star, which would be awesome, and I'm creating wildlife media that's changing the world and helping impact wildlife positively and our own species by default after that, I think there's almost less satisfaction in that and more just I like the satisfaction of taking the journey towards the North Star. And I think the hardest thing as an individual to find is, what is that North Star for you? And once you find that, really that's enough, I guess, is the best way of putting it.
Exactly. And so the way that you start getting to that is by making lists of things that really matter to you. So, some people would call it a resolution, but for me, it's not that. I every few months, I take out my little notebook with my list of things that I would really like to work on. And I divide them, some of them have to do with fitness, some nutrition, the time that I spend with my children, how much time I spend on my work, I really wanted to be a National Geographic speaker, and I put it on my list, and it just feels like all of a sudden all your energy goes towards making that happen. But the easy goals are the ones that have to do with, I'm going to buy myself a new car.
Mm-hmm.
The more difficult goals are the ones that have to do with your real purpose. So for me, in my list, it's always, I really would like to be part of the group of people that save the ocean.
When you started this journey back, and I think I read end of high school, getting into college in Mexico, did you ever expect it to come as far as it's gone?
I never thought about it as a destination. It's always been a journey. And I've always wanted to be part of the good people. I
Yeah.
always wanted to be part of I mean, I don't even know how to say it. It's not about a legacy. I just want to leave this planet better than I found it, and I would love for my children and for your children to enjoy time with some of the animals I've spent time with. I mean, why do we have to be so happy or just blasé to see it all disappear?
And to be so focused on going to Mars when
I
you're
know.
like, I always think it's interesting. People are so fascinated with going to this other world. And like, there's another world 2 feet down the block. Like if you take the time to go there, and unlike Mars, which is desolate and cold and 10 times worse than Antarctica, it's actually beautiful and full of life and is amazing. And
Yeah, well, I mean, not to mention there's nothing to eat or drink in Mars. So we're going to have to take every bite and every breath from Earth because this is our home planet. This is where we are meant to be.
it's that unfortunate feeling of like, you don't know what you got till it's gone sometimes. I always think of it as like when I get a small injury and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, my knee hurts. How come I didn't appreciate it when my knee was feeling good? And
Exactly. I should have gone for that run yesterday.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean,
Yeah.
it's true. And I often feel like a handful of people are holding this avalanche
Mhm.
of, carelessness and myopic. I mean, I don't even know what to call it, but it's this attitude, this capitalistic attitude, this worship of the me. And, we have to start thinking about this as a team. We are all alone in the universe and we have nowhere else to go.
And also, I think, and this is like, I'm very pro-human. I love humans. I'm
Me
like
too.
really into our species. I think we're amazing beings. But when you think of the ever lasting question of what are we here for and what are we doing, nobody still has an answer to that makes logical sense other than like trying to enjoy where you're at and being present. And to me, because we don't necessarily know like what our purpose is, why we're here, how important technology is in progression, like the idea of progression is even like this concept that we've constructed. It's really hard for me to place so much more value on. I think people write wildlife off as these beings that don't have emotions, don't have feelings, don't matter because it's just not as important as us.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that makes sense because I think we're placing importance on things that we've self-determined to be important where in the grand scheme of things, they might not be,
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's that lack of ecological knowledge, the lack of understanding of how the fabric of life is all tied together. And when you start, just disregarding the extinction of one species, you might not understand the huge implications up and down the food chain that disappearance of that one creature will have. And because we don't know, we should be careful.
And even if it's selfishly, I feel like that could have a lot of impact on us.
I mean, if somebody was equating it to being on an airplane, and you're seeing nuts and bolts flying out, but just because you don't know what pieces of the airplane they hold together doesn't mean they're not important.
Yes.
You should be doing everything possible to keep the thing together.
I think that's a really good metaphor. It makes sense. I am going to switch the knob and do some real fast-paced, rapid-fire questions to end up here because I want to end on a positive note.
Yes.
And the first being, if you could pinpoint, I'm sure there's a ton of these, but if there's one moment that you were in the field doing the work that you care so much about, that you looked back and said, I can't believe I get to do what I'm doing for a living, is there anything that jumps to the forefront?
It happens so often that it's not a fair question. But I can tell you the first moment when I had that feeling as a photographer, and it was early on in my career. I was in the middle of these massive festival in the highlands of New Guinea, and I lost track of the group of people that I was with, and I got lost in the sea of performers and dancers, I didn't speak anybody's language. And when I looked at my watch again, 8 hours had passed by. I hadn't eaten or drank or gone to the bathroom for so long. And I hadn't even thought about that. I was so involved in what I was doing and making images, and I was so happy.
What's your favorite animal?
My favorite animal is the jellyfish.
Oh, that's your favorite animal too. Wow.
I have a lot of favorite animals.
Although I will say that egg jellyfish or egg yolk jellyfish I think you posted recently was super cool looking. I like
Pretty
that.
cool, huh?
Yeah, very interesting.
It was amazing. And we have a lot of those here. No, I love cetaceans. I love dolphins. I have these conversations with them when I'm in the water with them. I must sound crazy. I feel like they can understand and hear what we're saying,
Yeah.
But honestly, I love all animals except for caterpillars.
What's wrong with caterpillars?
I just have this phobia, which is really sad. But I love all animals.
Do you like butterflies?
I love butterflies, and I understand the process.
No, I'm not trying to teach you. I think I feel like we all learned that pretty early on. I actually have a horrible memory of walking. We had a big, I don't know, like walnut tree or something in the back of the house when I was growing up that was 15 feet tall. And I remember being like 6 years old and walking out, and a caterpillar fell from the top of the canopy onto my shoulder. And it was one of those big, fat, furry ones.
Oh my God.
And it was scarring. I freaked out.
See, and this is where the phobia comes from. I had the same experience. I was in a party dressed in this beautiful dress, and all of a sudden a caterpillar fell on me. And it's almost like your mind goes blank. And when I remember anything again, I was in the ground screaming like a little Oh God, I wish I wasn't. I know they're beautiful, so ecologically important, and sad.
How about your favorite conservation/wildlife book?
Oh, I have several, but there's a couple that have made a huge impact on me, and it has to do as much with the writing, the quality of the writing and the storytelling than anything else. My favorite book of all time is Rachel Carson, The Sea Around Us. Okay. It's so beautifully written. It's a book about marine ecology, but it's gorgeous. And the other one is Carl Safina, A Song for the Blue Sea. A Song for the Blue Ocean, I think it's called. Just beautifully written, full of personal stories. So those are two of my favorites.
Oh, awesome. Well, for anybody listening, Carl Safina will be on the podcast in 2 weeks. So keep a lookout for that.
He is admired and loved.
Yeah, I'm a big fan and super excited to talk to him. Favorite documentary?
Favorite documentary? I actually have a few. I recently watched that one that's called Ramen Heads.
Is it about people like ramen?
No, it's about the call to ramen soup in Japan. But that's not my favorite. I just watched it recently.
I'm obsessed with ramen. I eat ramen at least once a week.
Well, then you have to watch Ramen Heads. You're really going to like it.
Oh, I'll check it out.
I really enjoyed Raising Extinction, Blackfish. I can't wait to see Shark Water Extinction, the late Rob Stewart's last documentary before he passed. Documentaries with a mission and with a message. I really love those. And, any good storytelling that captures people's imagination and makes you care about others is always powerful to me.
Next 5 years, what can we look out for?
All right. Next 5 years, we're going to save the ocean.
Okay. I like that. Good
together. I know. So we're going to do it through storytelling, through, just galvanizing a massive movement around the world of people who care, who want to live in a planet that is livable, where we don't have to live with the threat of climate change. And it really is going to take all of us to actually create that type of planet. And so that's my exciting news. We're going to be doing this in the next 5 years.
Hell yeah, I love that. And if people want to support by donating, signing petitions, learning how to support this, where should they go?
Please come to our website, SeaLegacy. It's a beautiful storytelling site full of stories and imagery and very emotional content. And you will find there's something called the tide, because we are turning the tide. And that is your people. That is your tribe. That is my tribe. This is
join the tide.
Yeah, join the tide. Help us turn the tide.
I was telling, I forget which podcast it was, but I was so mad at Christmas because I dropped so many hints to my family that I wanted Born to Ice for Christmas. And Nobody got it for me. And I was like, it was to the point where I was like, I thought it was insulting because I was very clear as to what I wanted.
We're going to send you a copy. Don't
Oh,
you?
no, I'm not plugging for that.
Yeah. Born to Ice is actually such a beautiful book, and for a photographer like Paul to have that retrospective of 30 years dedicated to the polar regions is it's an anthem.
And Amaze too. I'll take a copy of that.
Thank you so much. Amaze is just, it was Kate helped me make Amaze. It was awesome experience to go back into old archives, images that are 20, 30 years old, and realize that when you put them together, you're actually building the thread of a story that spans 3 decades. And
yeah,
it's such an honor as a photographer to put something like that out. And it talks about enoughness. So
what is that? Sorry, not to keep prolonging the ending here, but what was your one of your most iconic photos is that woman who has a goose or a duck on her head?
Yes, she's got a goose on her head, and that was the luck of a rookie photographer. I had a camera that I was learning how to use, one of those little mechanical single reflex cameras.
Yeah.
And she basically walked into my frame, and we were in this remote corner of Southwest China, having lunch in a little village. And I saw her. It was one of those cameras where you look at the picture and it's inverted. Mm-hmm. So I saw her walking upside down towards me. I didn't have a lot of time to do much because she was walking. She was going somewhere. She was fast. So I have 3 or 4 frames. And in a couple of them, the goose is completely blurry because it's panicking. And then there's one, she walked in front of a door, and it was like a workshop behind her. There were people sitting around a little fire in the middle of that room doing something. But the difference in exposure between the black background and her face was enough to separate her. And she was just wearing this amazing red hat and red dress. And
oh, so you just happened to run into her?
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, totally.
I thought you might have known. That was a weird. Do other people? Is that a common thing where?
I don't think so. Although over the years I've actually taken lots of pictures of people holding weird things on their head. This one takes the prize.
My last question is, if you could take a billboard and put it on the side of a major highway and disseminate one message or one sentence, one image in 10 words or less, what would that be?
Gosh, I don't want to end up with a gloom and doom to say our planet is dying. We all have to pitch in to save it. But maybe it would be something like, look around. Our planet is magical. It is worth protecting.
I love that. And that is a great way to wrap this up. Cristina, thank you so much. This is literally, I don't think I can explain. It's a dream come true for me. I'm a big, big fan. Super excited to keep following your journey. And to everybody else listening, until next time, stay wild. Thank you so much for listening. I honestly cannot express how much I appreciate you taking the time. For all information regarding this episode's guest, social channels, books, how you can support, etc., please check out our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to the podcast. We are everywhere that you can find podcasts. Subscribe to Escape the Zoo on YouTube, follow Escape the Zoo on Instagram, like Escape the Zoo on Facebook, and please share with your friends. It honestly goes so far and means so much to me. And lastly, if you'd like to be emailed with each new podcast and any other major Escape the Zoo updates, visit escapethezoo.tv and sign up for our email list. Thank you.